These rules weren't designed for productivity. They were designed for obedience. On paper, they look harmless, reasonable even. Show up at a certain time, use the approved language, follow the format, keep things professional. But somehow, these rules manage to shape entire workdays without improving the work itself. Have you ever stayed late just to be seen staying late? Have you ever written an email you didn't believe in, using words you would never say out loud, because that's how things are done? Have you ever followed a rule perfectly and still felt like you hadn't actually accomplished anything? That's not inefficiency, that's training. Some corporate rules don't exist to help work happen. They exist to make behavior predictable, to reduce ambiguity, to ensure that authority is visible even when results are not. And the most effective ones aren't the loud, obviously bad rules. They're the quiet ones, the ones that feel too small to resist. The ones everyone follows because questioning them would take more energy than obeying them. Over time, people adapt. They learn what matters isn't solving problems, it's signaling alignment, looking busy, sounding engaged, appearing compliant. Productivity becomes secondary, performance becomes theater. Today, we're opening the file on the strangest and most absurd experiments humanity has ever attempted. Not experiments in management, but experiments in control, disguised as culture, professionalism, and best practices. Because once a system rewards obedience over honesty, it no longer needs to care whether the work improves. It only needs to ensure the rules are followed. Fasten your seatbelts. Logic is about to die a spectacular death. Fact 1. When being on time meant being seen. The rule sounded simple. Arrive at 9 a.m. sharp. It was framed as professionalism, reliability, respect for the team. In practice, it rewarded presence over performance. People showed up early to signal commitment, then waited. Productivity didn't start at 9 o'clock. Surveillance did. The stated goal was efficiency. The real effect was synchronization. Managers could see everyone at once. Control became visible. Employees learned the lesson quickly. Being seen mattered more than getting started when work actually flowed best. The rule didn't improve output. It standardized obedience. Fact 2. When meetings existed to prove alignment. Meetings were justified as collaboration, transparency, shared understanding. But many meetings produced no decisions. Their value was symbolic. Attendance signaled buy-in. Speaking signaled engagement. Silence looked suspicious. The published goal was alignment. The lived outcome was performance theater. People prepared slides to show effort, not progress. Time filled itself because presence needed to be demonstrated. The rule didn't solve problems. It documented compliance. Fact 3. When email tone replaced honesty. Corporate communication guidelines demanded positivity, neutrality, and caution. Words like concern replaced problem. Opportunity replaced mistake. The goal was professionalism. The effect was dilution. People stopped naming issues clearly. Feedback softened until it lost meaning. Conflict didn't disappear, it went underground. The rule didn't create clarity, it trained avoidance. Fact 4. When dress codes signaled control, not skill. Dress codes were justified as branding and professionalism, but skill isn't visible in fabric. Obedience is. Uniform appearance made deviation noticeable. Creativity was welcomed, as long as it looked the same. The rule didn't raise standards, it lowered individuality. Fact 5. When policies survived after their purpose died. Some rules outlived the problems they were created to solve. Technologies changed, workflows evolved. The rules stayed. Removing them required admitting they were never essential. The rule didn't persist because it worked. It persisted because no one wanted to challenge authority. Fact 6. When staying late mattered more than finishing early. The rule was never written down, but everyone understood it. Leaving late meant commitment. Finishing early meant suspicion. Work that could be completed in 6 focused hours stretched into 10 performative ones. People slowed down to avoid looking idle. Efficiency became risky. The stated goal was dedication. The real outcome was time inflation. Employees learned to manage optics instead of energy. Productivity didn't increase. Exhaustion did. The rule didn't reward results. It rewarded endurance. Fact 7. When remote work required constant check-ins. Remote policies promised flexibility, trust, autonomy. Then came the check-ins, status updates, cameras on, just checking availability. The work didn't change, surveillance did. The stated goal was connection. The lived effect was constant interruption. Deep work fragmented into visibility pings. The rule didn't ensure productivity, it ensured presence was measurable. Fact 8. When breaks became a liability. Breaks were technically allowed, culturally discouraged. People ate at desks, skipped rest, stayed reachable. The stated goal was momentum. The result was depletion. Taking care of oneself became something to justify. Burnout was normalized as dedication. The rule didn't protect output, it consumed it. Fact 9. When flex time existed only on paper. Policies advertised flexibility. In reality, flexibility applied upward. Meetings were scheduled around leadership, not workflows. Those with less power adapted. Those with more set the clock. The rule didn't create balance, it preserved hierarchy. Fact 10. When time tracking replaced trust. Time tracking tools promised fairness and insight. They delivered anxiety. People optimized logs instead of work. Creativity shrank under measurement. Exploration looked inefficient. The rule didn't capture value, it captured compliance. Fact 11. When open communication meant safe language only. Companies praised openness. Speak up, share concerns, but only in approved language. Concerns had to be constructive. Problems had to come with solutions. Emotion had to be filtered out. The stated goal was psychological safety. The actual effect was linguistic obedience. People learned how to say less while sounding compliant. Real issues were translated into neutral phrases until urgency disappeared. The rule didn't encourage honesty, it trained self-censorship. Fact 12. When feedback required a script. Feedback frameworks promised clarity, structure, fairness. In practice, they limited range. Criticism had to be balanced, buffered, softened. Praise had to follow format. The stated goal was respect. The lived result was delay. By the time feedback arrived, it no longer mattered. Problems aged out instead of being solved. The rule didn't improve communication. It slowed it down. Fact 13. When transparency meant documentation. Transparency was defined as writing everything down. Emails, tickets, logs. The stated goal was alignment. The real function was traceability. People stopped speaking freely and started protecting themselves. Conversations moved from candid to careful. The rule didn't create trust, it created records. Fact 14. When meetings punished silence. Participation was measured by airtime. Quiet work looked disengaged. People spoke to be visible, not because they had something to add. The stated goal was inclusion. The outcome was noise. The rule didn't surface ideas, it rewarded performance. Fact 15. When corporate language replaced meaning. Buzzwords filled gaps where clarity should have been. Alignment, synergy, ownership. Everyone nodded, no one understood. The rule didn't clarify intent, it masked uncertainty. Fact 16. When appearance became a performance metric. Dress codes were justified as professionalism. The logic was visual consistency. The effect was behavioral conformity. Skill didn't change with clothing, authority did. People learned quickly what looked right mattered more than what worked. The rule didn't improve competence, it improved legibility for management. Fact 17. When desks had to look busy. Clean desks signaled disengagement. Messy desks signaled effort. People left papers out on purpose. Tabs stayed open. Visual noise became proof of labor. The stated goal was transparency. The outcome was theater. The rule didn't reveal work, it staged it. Fact 18. When badges and titles outweighed contribution. Access badges, titles, seating plans, small symbols that mapped power. Decisions followed hierarchy, not insight. Ideas gained weight based on who spoke them. The rule didn't organize work, it organized obedience. Fact 19. When ceremonies replaced progress. Stand-ups, check-ins, syncs, retros. Rituals multiplied even when problems didn't move. Attendance mattered more than outcomes. The rule didn't accelerate delivery, it reassured control. Fact 20. When professionalism meant emotional flatness. Emotions were allowed only if polished. Frustration had to sound calm. Urgency had to sound measured. The rule didn't create respect, it created emotional suppression. Fact 21. When productivity meant visibility. The company said the goal was productivity, output, impact, but the rules rewarded what could be seen, not what actually moved work forward. Being active mattered more than being effective. Quick responses mattered more than thoughtful ones. The stated goal was results. The lived reality was visibility. People optimized for what managers could observe. Deep work retreated because it didn't announce itself. The rule didn't increase productivity, it changed what productivity looked like. Fact 22. When culture meant uniformity. Corporate culture was described as shared values, belonging, alignment. In practice, it meant behavioral sameness. Same hours, same tone, same reactions. Difference felt risky. Adaptation felt non-compliant. The stated goal was cohesion. The real effect was compression. The rule didn't build culture, it reduced variance. Fact 23. When accountability meant traceability. Accountability was framed as ownership, responsibility, clarity, but the systems emphasized logs, tickets, and documentation over outcomes. Proving you tried mattered more than whether it worked. The stated goal was ownership. The actual outcome was defensiveness. The rule didn't encourage responsibility, it encouraged cover. Fact 24. When empowerment required permission. Empowerment was celebrated. Take initiative, be proactive. But initiative outside approved paths was punished. Permission had to be secured first. The stated goal was autonomy. The lived experience was dependency. The rule didn't empower action. It centralized approval. Fact 25. When efficiency created more work. Efficiency was promised through processes, templates, frameworks. Instead, work expanded to serve the process, filling forms, updating dashboards, attending alignment meetings. The stated goal was speed. The result was friction. The rule didn't streamline work. It justified itself. Fact 26. When fear replaced judgment. Rules multiplied to reduce mistakes, checklists, approvals, escalations. What they reduced was judgment. People stopped deciding and started complying. Risk felt dangerous even when it was necessary. Choosing the safe option mattered more than choosing the right one. The rule didn't eliminate errors, it eliminated ownership. Fact 27. When busy became a defense mechanism. Calendars filled up fast. Meetings stacked. Messages flowed constantly. Busyness became armor. If you were busy, you couldn't be blamed. If you were available, you looked expendable. The rule didn't increase workload, it legitimized avoidance. People stayed occupied to stay invisible. Fact 28. When creativity had to be pre-approved. Innovation was encouraged, within limits. New ideas needed decks, committees, and alignment first. By the time approval arrived, urgency was gone. The rule didn't prevent bad ideas. It filtered out inconvenient ones. Creativity survived only when it looked predictable. Fact 29. When honesty felt risky. Speaking plainly carried consequences. Tone mattered. Framing mattered. So people learned to hedge, to soften, to hint. The rule didn't foster respect. It made clarity dangerous. Fact 30. When performance became simulation. Work started to resemble work. Reports about progress replaced progress itself. The rule didn't collapse productivity. It replaced it with imitation. Fact 31. When rules protected managers, not work. Many rules exist to reduce uncertainty for leadership. Clear schedules, fixed formats, predictable behavior. They don't guarantee good results. They guarantee fewer surprises. The stated goal was consistency. The real benefit was managerial comfort. When outcomes are hard to control, behavior becomes the substitute. The rule didn't improve work. It reduced anxiety at the top. Fact 32. When removing a rule felt riskier than keeping it. No one remembered why some rules existed, but removing them meant responsibility. If something went wrong after a rule was removed, someone would be blamed. Keeping it was safer. The rule didn't survive because it worked. It survived because it provided cover. Fact 33. When compliance was easier than trust. Trust requires judgment. Judgment requires risk. Rules remove both. The stated goal was fairness. The result was rigidity. The rule didn't create equality. It standardized limitation. Fact 34. When power hid behind neutrality. Rules sounded objective, neutral, professional, but neutrality masked asymmetry. The people writing the rules rarely suffered from them. The rule didn't enforce order. It preserved hierarchy. Fact 35. When control looked like culture. Over time, rules stopped feeling imposed. They felt normal. People enforced them on each other. Culture replaced authority. The rule didn't need policing. It internalized itself. Fact 36. When power worked best without saying a word. The most effective rules were rarely enforced directly. They didn't need reminders or punishments. People followed them automatically, not because they agreed, but because deviating felt unsafe. Power didn't announce itself. It settled into habits, into routines, into, that's just how things work here. The rule didn't control behavior loudly. It normalized it quietly. Fact 37. When self-censorship replaced supervision. Managers didn't need to monitor every decision. Employees learned to monitor themselves. Before speaking, people edited. Before acting, they imagined consequences. Before suggesting change, they calculated risk. The rule didn't save oversight costs. It outsourced control inward. Fact 38. When freedom was framed as privilege. Flexibility was presented as something to earn. Trust was conditional. Autonomy came after compliance. Freedom wasn't a baseline. It was a reward. The rule didn't motivate growth. It incentivized obedience first. Fact 39. When stability mattered more than truth. Rules favored predictability over accuracy. Stable narratives over honest feedback. Bad news was delayed. Uncomfortable facts softened. Problems aged quietly. The rule didn't protect the organization. It protected appearances. Fact 40. When control felt like safety. For many, rules felt comforting. They removed ambiguity. They explained expectations. Control didn't feel oppressive. It felt familiar. The rule didn't persist through force. It persisted through relief. Fact 41. When results stopped being the primary goal. In theory, organizations exist to produce outcomes, products, services, value. But once rules dominate daily behavior, outcomes become secondary. What matters most is whether processes were followed, whether forms were filled, whether procedures were respected. Failure is tolerated if it's compliant. Success is suspicious if it breaks the script. The rule didn't remove accountability, it redirected it. People weren't judged on impact, they were judged on adherence. Fact 42. When thinking became optional. Rules simplify decisions, follow the process, escalate the issue, use the template. Over time, thinking becomes unnecessary, even risky. Independent judgment feels like deviation. The rule didn't support decision-making, it replaced it. Organizations didn't lose intelligence suddenly, they trained it out slowly. Fact 43. When good employees learned to disappear. Visibility carried risk. Standing out invited scrutiny. Questioning norms drew attention. So capable employees minimized friction. They stayed quiet, delivered safely, avoided edges. The rule didn't remove talent, it flattened it. The best employees didn't leave first. They learned to disappear inside the system. Fact 44. When organizations confused order with health. Order looks stable, quiet, predictable. But order without truth is fragile. Problems don't vanish, they wait. Innovation doesn't die, it migrates elsewhere. The rule didn't create resilience, it delayed consequences. Fact 45. When control became the product. Eventually, the system stops pretending. Rules no longer serve the work serves the rules. Control becomes the output, compliance becomes success, and the organization forgets why it existed in the first place. The rule didn't fail the company, it replaced its purpose. So far, none of these rules existed because people didn't want to work well. They existed because organizations wanted certainty. What we've seen isn't a collection of bad policies, it's a pattern, a system that slowly shifted focus away from results and toward behavior that could be monitored, predicted, and controlled. Time was measured instead of output. Language was managed instead of meaning. Appearance mattered more than capability. And over time, people adapted. They learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. They learned which rules could be followed without question and which ones were too costly to challenge. They learned that looking busy was safer than being effective, and that compliance carried less risk than honesty. None of this required force. It only required repetition. Because the most powerful rules are the ones that don't feel imposed. They feel normal. They feel professional. They feel like how things are done. Eventually, the system no longer needed managers to enforce obedience. People enforced it themselves. They edited their thoughts before sharing them. They slowed down to avoid standing out. They stopped asking whether a rule helped the work and focused instead on whether it was followed correctly. That's the quiet transformation, not from productive to lazy, but from engaged to careful, from responsible to cautious, from thinking to performing. And the most unsettling part is how familiar this feels, because many people didn't resist these rules. They survived them. They adjusted. They learned to function inside a structure that rewarded predictability over progress, which raises an uncomfortable question. If a system runs smoothly, looks stable, and feels orderly, but slowly drains judgment, initiative, and honesty, what exactly is it optimizing for? And who is it really serving? Maybe the problem was never that these rules were illogical. Maybe the problem was that they worked exactly as intended. They created order, predictability, calm, a sense that everything was under control, even when nothing meaningful was actually improving. In many organizations, control feels safer than trust. Trust requires judgment. Judgment invites uncertainty, and uncertainty makes leaders uncomfortable. So rules step in. Rules that don't ask whether work is good, only whether it was done the right way. Rules that don't reward thinking, only consistency. Rules that don't prevent failure, they just make sure failure happens quietly, compliantly, and on schedule. Over time, something subtle happens. People stop asking what the work needs. They start asking what the system expects. Creativity doesn't disappear, it becomes cautious. Responsibility doesn't vanish, it becomes procedural. Intelligence doesn't leave, it learns to stay quiet. And the organization looks fine from the outside. Meetings happen, reports get filed, metrics move just enough to look alive. Everything appears stable. But stability isn't health. A system can be orderly and still be hollow, efficient and still be fragile, calm and still be deeply afraid of change. That's the paradox. The more an organization relies on rules to manage people, the less it needs to understand the work itself. Control replaces curiosity. Compliance replaces competence. And eventually, the rules stop supporting the organization. They become the organization. This isn't a story about bad managers or lazy employees. It's a story about systems that optimize for the wrong thing because it feels safer in the short term. Because questioning rules feels risky, but questioning purpose feels even riskier. This has been the Absurdist Files, where logic takes a vacation and reality writes the jokes. And in this case, the joke isn't that people follow rules that make no sense. It's that so many systems confuse obedience for effectiveness and don't realize what they've lost until there's nothing left to control.